Video of the first about two-thirds of book nine. I think book nine is very rich and complex and warrants two videos. So this first one I call book nine, The Surprising Challenge of Tempting Eve. And it takes us to line 792. So again, as I've said throughout these preview videos, you can print this out, or I would recommend just marking up your book, taking 10 minutes and marking up your book. This is a pretty complicated chapter. So it begins, as you might expect, with Milton feeling obligated to prepare us for the fact that the tone of the poem is decidedly going to change in book nine from uplifting and hopeful to tragic. So that's the opening sort of reflection he gives, and really worth reading. I think there's a research paper to be done just on the invocation of the muse business and all the little Miltonic opening reflections. Second, Satan, who can only travel at night for fear of being spied, takes a 7-night trip to Eden, turns into a snake. That's kind of an interesting passage. There's something I'll ask you about later, but there's an incredible satanic soliloquy, and something else to pay attention to now that we're more than halfway done, 2/3 done, is when you have someone who soliloquizes off and on, pay attention maybe to how they're different later in the poem than they are in the beginning. He's had a lot of time to think, and there's some new ideas here. Fourth, Eve and Adam discuss their gardening challenges. One of the weird challenges of life before the fall is that everything grows too fast. So Eve suggests that they separate to get more work done. And Adam obviously has his concerns, but that's basically the circumstances that allow Eve to be alone so that Satan can tempt her. It's because the garden grows too fast. Line 412 to 530, this brilliant sort of pregame reflection of Satan lurking. And there's a moment I'll talk about later where he just looks at Eve and is dumbfounded. Sixth, seventh, and eighth, and ninth, there are 3 attempts to tempt Eve. The first here, he tries flattery. Eve responds. The second attempt here, Satan offers his autobiography, or, it's not a real one, but to Eve it is. And Satan brings her to the tree. She restates God's command that she's not allowed to eat it. And then this rhetorically amazing, virtuosic couple of pages where Satan unleashes every rhetorical trick in the book, and mainly appeals to Eve's intellect, which is fascinating since he started by appealing to her flattery. He realizes she's formidable. She then has a moment we'll talk about where she thinks. Milton definitely isn't a feminist, but I don't think he's a uniform misogynist either. If he was, I don't think he would bother having Eve think. And the fall is kind of curiously worded. As you'll see, it's extremely brief. So an obviously significant passage is, and I'll try to, sort of take segments from this. We're not going to look at all 250 lines or so. But it's the fall itself. It's the moment we've been waiting for in many respects. It's the climax of the epic. So, open your books and get ready to mark them up. So his first attempt is to flatter her. So here we go. It's around line 532. Wonder not, sovereign mistress, this is Satan as the serpent talking to Eve. If perhaps thou canst, who art sole wonder, much less arm thy looks the heaven of mildness with disdain. So don't ruin your beauty with the look of disdain as I'm talking to you. Displeased that I approach you thus and gaze insatiate. I thus single, nor have feared thy awful brow, more awful thus retired. Awful meaning instilling awe, not bad. Fairest resemblance of thy maker, fair. Interesting statement. The serpent seems to know what God looks like, which should have been a hint. Thee all things living gaze on, all things thine by gift, and thy celestial beauty adore with ravishment beheld. So we have insatiate, we have ravishment, we have all these words that we're going to see after the fall sort of hinted at here. There best beheld, we're universally admired, but here In this enclosure wild, these beasts among, beholders rude and shallow to discern half what in thee is fair, one man except who sees thee. So you're surrounded by creatures who can't appreciate how beautiful you are, except for Adam. And what is one? Is like one person enough? Who should be seen a goddess among gods, adored and served by angels numberless, thy daily train. So clear appeal to what he imagines is just what's going to be enough. There's no evidence that Satan wants to require several attempts to get her to eat the fruit. So he presumes that flattering her will do the trick. Watch what she says. Eve's response is 553. What may this mean? Language of man pronounced by tongue of brute. So this is a brute animal using the language of mankind. In human sense expressed, the first at least of these I thought denied to beast. I didn't know the animals could talk. Whom God on their creation day created mute to all articulate sound. Eve was there for the lecture on creation a couple of chapters ago. And she knows that animals aren't supposed to be able to talk. The latter I demur, for in their looks much reason, and in their actions often appears the serpent, subtlest beast of all the field I knew, but not with human voice endued. Redouble then this miracle, and say, how camest thou speakable of mute, and how to me so friendly grown above the rest of brutal kind that daily are in sight? Say, for such wonder claims attention due. Interestingly, she never addresses Satan's appeal to her vanity. She just sidesteps it and asks a scientific question. How can you talk? How did you get to be able to talk? So I would pay attention to that. Then Satan tries another trick. He makes up a story about himself, and he answers Eve's question. He says, again, not giving up on flattery, empress of this fair world. The word fair is a sort of linguistic hypnosis here, too. He calls her fair, the world fair. Resplendent Eve, easy to me it is to tell thee all what thou commandst, and right, thou shouldst be obeyed. Even that is subtle. Of course I'll tell you because you're the sort of person that you're amazing, right? I was at first as other beasts that graze the trodden herb of abject thoughts, and lo, as was my food, nor anything but food discerned, or sex, and apprehended nothing high. Till, on a day roving the field, I chanced a goodly tree, far distant to behold, loaden with fruit of fairest colors mixed, ruddy and gold. I nearer drew to gaze, when from the boughs a savory odor blown, grateful to appetites, more pleased my sense than smell of sweetest fennel, or the teats of ewe or goat dropping with milk at even, unsucked of lamb or kid that tend their play. To satisfy the sharp desire I had of tasting those fair apples, I resolved not to defer. This is the serpent, right? Hunger and thirst at once, powerful persuaders, quickened at the scent of that alluring fruit. The apple smells so amazing, right? Urged me, so keen, about the mossy trunk. I wound me soon, he's going up the trunk. For high above the ground, the branches would require thy utmost reach or atoms. Round the tree, all other beasts that saw with like desire, longing, and envying stood, but could not reach. Amid the tree now got where plenty hung tempting so high, so nigh, to pluck and eat my fill I spared not. For such pleasure till that hour at feed or fountain never had I found. Sated at length, I was eventually satisfied. Before long I might perceive strange alteration in me. The degree of reason in my inward powers and speech wanted not long. Thenceforth to speculations high or deep I turn my thoughts. So it isn't simply speech, it's the ability to think that this fruit seems to have given him. And with capacious mind considered all things visible in heaven or earth or middle, all things fair and good. But all that fair and good in thy divine semblance, and in thy beauty's heavenly ray, united I beheld. No fair to thine equivalent or second, which compelled me thus, though importune perhaps, to come and gaze and worship thee, Eve, of right declared sovereign of creatures, universal dame. The speech is bookended in flattering and complimenting Eve. But Satan says the most attractive thing to Eve, who's brilliant, and says, this allowed me to think kind of heavenly thoughts, not only speak, but to think. Eve's response is fascinating. She says, okay, lead then, line 631. Show me where the tree is. And then 659, she says, of the fruit of each tree in the garden we may eat, but of the fruit of this fair tree amidst the garden, God has said, you shall not eat. I think you could write a paper on the word fair. It is used. It is like the wild card word. It's used in so many different ways. It can take on so many different meanings and connotations. She just restates God's command. So it looks like she's resisting Satan. So even his sort of empathetic autobiographical argument doesn't work fully. She just restates God's command. Now, Satan realizes he has to let out the big guns. So he unleashes a rhetorical barrage on her, but that ultimately he realizes that maybe what's attractive to her are thoughts. He says this, and I actually put this paragraph, this is the paragraph preceding Satan's rhetorical flourish in his third attempt to tempt Eve, because I think this is really interesting. There's some interesting quirky things here. She scarce had said, though brief, when now, more bold the tempter, but with show of zeal and love to man, and indignation at his wrong, new part puts on. So Satan sort of changes here. And as to passion moved, fluctuates disturbed, yet comely and in act raised, as of some great matter to begin. Satan, even as a serpent, kind of gets ready to give a big speech. As, please circle this and put ES in your margins, because this is the beginning of an epic simile. What does Satan the snake look like when he's getting ready to give his great speech? It's like when of old some orator renowned in Athens or free Rome, where eloquence flourished, since mute. The last time there was anything like rhetorical power and eloquence, the serpent says, was in Athens and Rome, or the poet says, was in Athens or Rome. And since then, like English history recently, doesn't exist. To some great cause addressed, stood in himself collected, while each part, motion, each act, one audience before the tongue. Sometimes in height began, and as no delay of preface brooking, though his zeal of right, so standing, moving, or to height upgrown, the tempter, all impassioned, thus began. So this is Satan as Cicero. O sacred, wise, and wisdom-giving plant. He moves his attention from Eve to the plant. He calls the plant mother of science. And science originally meant knowledge, right? Mother of knowledge. Now I feel thy power within me clear, not only to discern things in their causes, but to trace the ways of highest agents, deemed, however wise, queen of this universe. Okay, now he's talking to Eve. Do not believe those rigid threats of death. You shall not die. How should you? By the fruit? It gives you life to knowledge. By the threatener? Look on me who have touched and tasted, yet both live, and life, more perfect, have attained than fate meant me, by venturing higher than my lot. Shall that be shut to man, which to the beast is open? Look at that argument, right? If a snake can have this, why shouldn't you? Or will God incense his anger for such a petty trespass, and not praise rather your dauntless virtue, whom the pain of death denounced, whatever thing death be, deterred not from achieving what might lead to happier life, knowledge of good and evil. Of good, how just. Of evil, and this is right out of the Areopagitica, of evil, what is evil? Be real, why not known, since easier shunned? If you knew the nature of good and evil, you could avoid it better. Think of the irony dripping from this, because what's happening now? Evil itself is tempting her by saying this. It's brilliant. God, therefore, cannot hurt ye and be just. He can't do both at the same time. This is just machine gun arguments. Not just, not God. Not feared then, nor obeyed. Your fear itself of death removes the fear. Why then was this forbid? Why? But to awe. Why? But to keep you low and ignorant. His worshippers. He knows, God knows, that in the day you eat thereof, your eyes that seem so clear, yet are but dim, shall perfectly be then opened and cleared, and you shall be as gods, knowing both good and evil, as they know. That you shall be as gods, since I as man, eternal man, is but proportion meets. I of brute, human. You of human, God. So if I can become a talking, thinking human, like a talking, thinking human as a snake, you as a talking, thinking human, if you eat the fruit, can become like a god. This gives you a sort of ontological promotion. It makes you a different thing. So you shall die, perhaps, by putting off human to put on gods, death to be wished, though threatened, which no worse than this can bring. And what are gods? That man may not become as they, participating godlike food. The gods are first, and that advantage use on our belief, that all from them proceeds. I question it. For this fair earth I see, warmed by the sun, producing every kind. Them, the gods, the angels, nothing. If they, all things, who enclose knowledge of good and evil in this tree, that who so eats thereof forthwith attains wisdom without their leave? And wherein lies the offense, that man should thus attain to know? What can your knowledge hurt him, or this tree impart against his will, if all be his? That's a great argument. How could anything you know hurt God? Or is it envy? And can envy dwell in heavenly breasts? Can God be envious? You could see the next thought. If God is the sort of being that can be envious of you eating a piece of fruit, the next thought is, then what's the point? These and many more causes import your need of this fair fruit. God is humane, reach then, freely eat. So many arguments there. And Eve eats. That's what does it. Here's really quirky moments. So before the temptation, Satan looks at Eve. Milton is an expert in knowing when to let characters pause and think about stuff. So he's in Eden, which is perfect, and he's looking at Eden's most perfect creation, Eve. And here's what the narrator, the poet, says Satan's thinking. Much he the place admired. Eden, right? But the person, Eve, more. He admires Eve more than Eden. As, epic simile alert, right here. What is it like when Satan, coming from hell, is in Eden admiring Eve? What is that like? It's as one who long in a populous city is pent, is stuck, where houses thick and sewers annoy the air, forth issuing on a summer morn, to breathe among the pleasant villages and farms adjoined. From each thing met conceives delight, the smell of grain or tended grass or kine or dairy, each rural sight, each rural sound, if chance with nymph-like step, fair virgin pass, what pleasing seemed for her now pleases more. That's one epic simile. Satan seeing Eve in Eden is like someone stuck amid the sewers of a busy city, leaving for the country and smelling all the perfect rural smells. She most, and in her look sums all delight. Such pleasure took the serpent to behold this flowery plat, the sweet recess of Eve, thus early, thus alone, her heavenly form angelic, but more soft and feminine, her graceful innocence, her every air of gesture, or least action, overawed his malice, and with rapine sweet bereaved his fierceness of the fierce intent it brought. Watch this. I don't know if this ever happens anywhere else. That space, so he's looking at Eve, right? The evil one, abstracted, stood from his own evil, and for the time remained stupidly good. Stupid meaning like speechless, dumbfounded. But what does it mean that he could separate himself from his own evil? Maybe in his mind, that in his mind he can suspend his malicious intent and observe beauty, that he's still capable of doing that, of enmity disarmed, of guile, of hate, of envy, of revenge. But the hot hell that always in him burns, though in mid-heaven, Eden, soon ended his delight. He only can have that experience like temporarily, right? It's almost like the moral version of him having some luminescence kind of from heaven, but it's like a dusky light. It isn't the luminescence from heaven. And tortures him now more, the more he sees of pleasure, not for him ordained. Oh man, that's great. And then I have to say this actually reminds me of a chapter in Pride and Prejudice as well, weirdly enough. She doesn't just eat the apple. After that long series of temptations, Milton pauses and has Eve think. And as I said earlier, I think Milton's view of gender is more complicated than what a lot of readers seem to think it is. Sure, there's a lot of like overtly sexist language. Some of that is obviously cultural. It's the 17th century, but he has Eve think. And here's what she says after the serpent's temptation. She says, she's talking to the fruit. Great are thy virtues, doubtless, best of fruits, though kept from man and worthy to be admired, whose taste, too long forborne at first to say, gave elocution to the mute. You, fruit, allowed snakes to talk, and taught the tongue not made for speech to speak thy praise. Thy praise he also who forbids thy use, conceals not from us, naming thee the tree of knowledge, knowledge both of good and evil, forbids us then to taste. So she mentions the serpent and she mentions God. And these are the competing voices in her mind. But his forbidding commends thee more. God forbidding us to eat you commends you more, while it infers the good by thee communicated and our want, our lack. It reminds us that we don't know the difference between good and evil right now, and that his prohibiting it kind of states the good that's inside you. For good unknown sure is not had, or had and yet unknown is as not had at all. In plain then, what forbids he but to know? He's forbidding us to know things. Forbids us good, forbids us to be wise. He's blocking us from wisdom and goodness and knowledge. Such prohibitions bind not. But look at all the questions. Even if you didn't even speak English, look at all the questions. Look at question marks. But if death bind us with afterbands, what profit then our inward freedom? In the day we eat of this fair fruit, our doom is we shall die. How dies the serpent? So she's observing and creating these little syllogisms. If it's the case that the fruit leads to death, how is the serpent not dead? He's eaten and lives and knows and speaks and reasons and discerns, irrational till then. For us alone was death invented? Or to us denied this intellectual food for beasts reserved? For beasts it seems, yet, that one beast which first hath tasted envies not, but brings with joy the good befallen him, author unsuspect, friendly to man, far from deceit or guile. Obviously that's dripping with irony, because the serpent's nothing but deceit and guile. What fear I then? Her conclusions don't come easily. She asks difficult questions of herself and then thinks. Rather, what note of fear under this ignorance of good and evil, of God or death or law or penalty? Here grows the cure of all, this fruit divine, fair to the eye, inviting to the taste, of virtue to make wise. What hinders then to reach and feed at once both body and mind? So I just want to point out, later Milton says that Eve fell too easily. It just doesn't look that way to me. It required Satan to unload all of his angelic rhetorical tricks on her. And even then, it required her to think for 30 lines, almost like a Shakespearean hero in a soliloquy, asking herself all these questions and wrestling with the voice of God and the voice of the serpent and everything she knows. Here are some suggestions for journaling and discussion. Closely read Satan's soliloquy early in the book, 99 to 178. Think about other things he said, and then look at this and see if there's been any progression or regression in the character of Satan. 2, what do you think is the most important moment that leads to Eve's sin? 3, how does book 9 so far change your reading of the poem? And 4, as always, if something specifically stands out to you, please write about that. Good luck with your reading.